If more fiber and protein fit your New Year health goals, get better macros with Hero Bread. They have sliced bread, tortillas, bagels, and more with protein and high fiber. And there's 0 to 5 grams of net carbs and 0 grams of sugar. Hit your goals with easy swaps for your favorite bready dishes with 10% off your order. Go to hero.co and use code HERO26 at checkout. That's 10% off with code HERO26 at HERO.co. All figures per serving of Hero Bread contains up to 18 grams of fat per serving. Not a low-calorie food. See nutrition facts on hero.co.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's Golden Age, with a special emphasis on their lives behind the scenes. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be talking about dance legend Gene Kelly. This one's for you, Joy. Thanks for the request. My primary source for this episode was the book He's Got Rhythm: The Life and Career of Gene Kelly by Cynthia Brideson and Sara Brideson. Before I begin, I want to give a quick shout out to our newest Patreon member. Welcome and thank you to Lisa D, or maybe Teresa D. Both names were listed on the membership, so thank you to Lisa and Teresa. Maybe it was a gifted one. I really appreciate your support. Let's dive into the life of Gene Kelly. Eugene Curran Kelly was born on August 23, 1912, to parents James and Harriet in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Gene was the third child for the couple, and they would go on to have 2 more children. In total, the Kelly family was made up of 3 boys and 2 girls. James sold phonographs for a living, so he was traveling for work 5 days out of the week. So Harriet held down the fort on the home front mostly alone. When Gene was a baby, his father was at the top of his game in the phonograph sales business. But when sales decreased, the family was forced to move to a poorer and much more crowded area of Pittsburgh. Still, James and Harriet made the best of this situation in order to provide their children with a good, wholesome childhood. Business really fluctuated for him in the phonograph business, it seems. There were really good times and there were really bad times. Church was a very important part of the Kelly family's life, as were family dinners, where everyone was expected to be dressed in formal attire before sitting at the table. James was sometimes strict, but he did so as he wanted to make sure he was raising good members of society. Gene and his siblings attended Catholic school, but their mother believed they needed a more enriching education than what they could get from the nuns. It was really important to Harriet that all of her children were introduced to the arts, most importantly to her being dance. So she enrolled all of the children in dance school. Gene Kelly was 7 years old when he attended his very first dance class. Harriet also prioritized the theater, taking all 5 of the children to traveling Broadway plays whenever they visited Pittsburgh. The family was not swimming in money, so dance lessons and theater tickets for 5 children meant budget cuts elsewhere in their lives, including no more dessert after dinner. This was a huge bummer for Gene, as he had a huge sweet tooth. But he could handle the sacrifice, because he really loved dancing. He made up for it as an adult when he frequently ate candy bars for breakfast. I'm not going to pretend that I haven't done that many times. Speaking of food, the authors of the biography I read were gracious enough to share some more of Gene Kelly's favorite foods. He liked a classic bologna and cheese sandwich, But what he really loved were pickle, cheese, liverwurst, and peanut butter sandwiches. Aside from sandwiches and sweets, Gene was a steak and potatoes guy. In the Kelly home, the kids were able to choose the family dinner on their birthday. No limits and no rules. So on Gene's birthdays, he would choose cake for the salad course, cake for the main course, and cake for the dessert course. Now that's my kind of dinner. While Harriet encouraged dancing and the arts in the children, Father James encouraged athletics, something that obviously benefited dancing strength and ability as well, and vice versa. After a really bad bout of pneumonia when he was 7 years old, Gene's uncle recommended gymnastics to help strengthen his lungs as he healed. I'm not sure why gymnastics specifically for lung health, but that's what Uncle Gus said, so off to gymnastics they went. And as with everything he put his mind to, Gene excelled. Of the 5 Kelly children, Gene was the most mischievous, the most accident-prone, and the one who got sick the most often. The Kelly kids were constantly causing chaos and mayhem in their neighborhood, even almost burning the neighborhood to the ground on one occasion, when their backyard fort made with burlap walls caught fire and began to spread quickly. Gene had broken bones, almost daily fistfights, and more than one near-death experience. Once as a small boy, he tried to build his own trolley, modeled by the ones that operated in the streets of Pittsburgh. On his maiden voyage in his homemade little trolley car, he went right under a large truck, right through the wheelbase, and miraculously came out the other side unharmed, just like the Griswolds on Christmas Vacation. One childhood accident left him with a lifelong scar on his cheek. He was riding his tricycle with no handlebars and fell face first into a piece of cast iron, which punctured his left cheek. That was just life with little Gene Kelly. Gene turned 9 years old in the summer of 1921, and that year his mother began signing him and his siblings up for amateur night contests with their dance routines, using the stage name The 5 Kellys. Her highest dreams saw them at the Palace Theater in New York on the vaudeville circuit. But the reality of it was that they weren't going to make it much past those small local venues, especially when half of the group was not interested in performing or dancing. Gene, however, loved expressing himself through dance. Every summer throughout middle school and high school, Gene performed on a showboat that cruised the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans, and he loved it. The prosperous 1920s were good to the Kelly family as they were able to move back into a better neighborhood and a larger home again. They were also able to have a summer home on Lake Erie, which Gene loved. He had really comforting memories of the family's time at the lake. So the 20s were good, but we all know how the high-flying decade of the 1920s ended, right? The stock market crash and the swift end to all of that prosperity. Life as most people knew it changed overnight. During his high school years, Gene Kelly excelled in sports, baseball being his favorite and what he felt strongest at. He also embraced the performing arts. His years of dance lessons paid off when it was time to audition for school plays, and he was easily cast in starring roles of all the plays. During his senior year, the drama club put on a performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream. It turned out to be very memorable to not only Gene, but everyone at school, because during the performance, Gene's pants fell down. Right down to his ankles. Must have been some pretty loose pants. That incident didn't scare him off the stage, though. It would scare me off the stage, but he was apparently tougher than me. He also joined the assembly squad and danced during school assemblies. And aside from performing arts and sports, Gene was also the associate editor of his high school newspaper and yearbook. He loved to write and was considering a career in journalism. Believe it or not, his mother had her sights set on Gene's older brother Fred as far as a career in dance and show business. She thought Gene should be a lawyer. She still encouraged him to keep up with his dancing, though, but she wanted him to enter the professional world. Gene graduated from high school with honors in May of 1929, with plans to move on to Penn State for economics and then continue on to law school. In the senior questionnaire at his high school, Gene was voted third wittiest in his class, but he came in first in the category of boy who thinks he's the wittiest. Now, like I mentioned, the Roaring 20s and Jazz Age America was booming with industry, business, and the performing arts. Until that one day when it all came to a screeching halt. Well, we have seen Gene Kelly graduate high school now in May of 1929 and begin Penn State with an economics major in September of 1929. The day when everything changed was Monday, October 28th, 1929. Just when Gene was getting settled in on campus. Black Monday, the day of the great stock market crash. The day everything changed. Nobody was able to buy phonographs anymore, so James lost his job and couldn't find a new one. Everyone was looking for work. And also, like many other defeated men who were losing hope in maintaining their ability to provide for their families, James turned to alcohol to drown the defeat. Temporarily drown the defeat. Gene remained in school and, being quite a distance away from home, was unaware of the severity of his family's situation, or the world's situation. That this was a severe crisis. I would assume, being in the economics program, that his professors were informing them of the current situation. But Gene didn't totally grasp the severity of it at first. It kind of reminds me of the start of the COVID pandemic. I remember being completely oblivious to just how impactful the situation we were entering in March 2020 really was. I knew what was happening was potentially bad, but we had never lived through anything like that before. So I thought for sure this illness would just run its course, just like every flu season, and we'd be back on our merry way. I had no idea when we went into lockdown in March of 2020 that we were closing the door on life as we'd known it forever. I mean, think about how much has changed since then. I had no idea. I think I was in denial. And it makes me really sad when I think about it. How much has changed to humanity since before the pandemic? How much has changed with everything? So I say all of that just to help place us into the mind of Gene Kelly in the immediate aftermath of the stock market crash and those very early days of the Great Depression. He had no idea what kind of inferno they were all being thrown into. Gene first practiced activism during his first year at Penn State. He was a member of a fraternity and was having a great time as such. Until the day the fraternity refused entry to one of Gene's friends because he was Jewish. In another oblivious moment, Gene learned in that moment that every fraternity was segregated. And you know what? That didn't sit well with Gene Kelly. Between the racism and anti-Semitism, along with the harsh initiation process that made Gene uncomfortable, he promptly quit the fraternity. But he wanted to do more. So, together with his friends, the Jewish kid who was denied entry and another friend, they decided to be a force for change. To try to, at least. They called themselves rebel activists. They tried, but they were just so far ahead of their time. Nothing really changed then. But it does make you think about how many little groups of fighters there have been like Gene and his friends throughout history, who have seen inequality and fought it. How all of those little fights, through many determined decades, finally add up to more and more little fights until they hopefully finally snowball into real change. So the little fights do matter. It didn't take long for Gene to face the reality of what was happening in the world outside of Penn State and to understand the severity of the economic situation. Once he did everything he could to help his family. He took whatever job he could. He laid bricks, dug ditches, worked as a soda jerk, was a gas station attendant, and made tires at the Firestone plant. He was also a camp counselor for the YMCA and organized weekly shows with the camp, and he loved that. Here, he helped boys understand that dancing wasn't just for girls, and it was a sport that required great strength and great ability. That dancing was cool, and the kids loved him. He did this for a few summers. Gene was still able to attend college too, which was a real blessing. He was so lucky in that regard. After a year at Penn State, he transferred to the University of Pittsburgh. That way he could live at home while going to school. All of the Kelly children were able to attend college. Their mother held it in high importance. They had to work hard to help pay their tuition, but they all made it. Even though the world was in the midst of the Great Depression, Harriet was able to open a dance school of her very own, with her son Gene as the main instructor. So not only was he a full-time college student, where he, of course, was part of the drama club choreographing and performing in plays, but he was a dance instructor and performed with his brother almost every night as well. The guy had ambition and lots of energy. In his dance class, he made people want to learn how to dance like him. Adults wanted to learn, and parents wanted their children to learn. Because Gene wasn't dancing like everyone else. His style was really cool and modern, although he did teach the classics too. He made his routines appealing to the everyday person. He was reachable. He was fun to watch and fun to engage with, and everyone loved him. Gene's dance school, despite the Great Depression, did remarkably well and put on successful annual reviews with his student stars. And he was making pretty decent money doing so. The whole family was. It was a family business. The Kelly brothers, Gene and Fred, got their first taste of the big time when their mother secured them an audition with Cab Calloway. Calloway had just lost the Nicholas brothers to Hollywood, and he was looking for a replacement brother dancing duo. Now, if you don't know who the Nicholas brothers are, please look up videos of them. They were remarkable dancers. They did things that seemed impossible to do with the human body, in perfect sync with one another. And they made it look easy. Fred Astaire has called them the best dancers to ever live. And many people think Fred Astaire is the best dancer to ever live. So when Harriet heard the great Cab Calloway was looking for a brother act to replace the Nicholas brothers, she jumped on it. There was just one thing, though. The Nicholas brothers were black, and Cab Calloway specifically wanted a new black brother duo. Harriet told Calloway's rep that, yep, the Kelly brothers are black, just hoping for the best. Well, Cab Calloway was skeptical when he saw the white Irish Kelly boys show up for the audition. This was an all-black jazz band, and they wanted black dancers. But the Kelly boys blew them away. They were hired. It was just a short gig, but they were dancing with the Cab Calloway Orchestra. Even with Gene Kelly's dance passion turning into a real lucrative venture, he still didn't see his future being supported by dance. He graduated from college with his economic degree and prepared to go on to law school, just as planned. He wasn't too excited about it, but that was the most logical and responsible thing to do for his future, he thought. And it would make his mother very happy. Well, he made it 2 months into law school and realized there was no way a future in law was a future for him. Not his cup of tea. It was okay, though, because he was accepted into the Chicago Association of Dance Masters. And this catapulted his abilities as a dancer and likely future in dance after all. He'd already been a master of many different cultural dance techniques, but in Chicago, he expanded those skills even broader, even learning Spanish dance from Rita Hayworth's uncle, Angel Cancino. Gene Kelly was also invited to perform at the 1933-1934 Chicago World's Fair, and requested back by President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. 12-year-old Judy Garland performed there too, as well as 9-year-old Donald O'Connor, 2 future stars that Gene Kelly would work alongside in their future lives in Hollywood. In the summer of 1935, 23-year-old Gene Kelly was offered a screen test with RKO Pictures. He almost turned it down. He was a dancer, not an actor. But his mother, Harriet, pushed him to do the test. He did, and the studio decided they weren't interested. It wasn't his time yet, but his time was sure to come. Gene's next step was giving Broadway a try. He wanted to work on Broadway not as a performer, but as a choreographer. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was going to give it his all. So, in the summer of 1937, Gene Kelly got a one-way train ticket to New York City. He, of course, would have to work his way up to choreography in Broadway productions, which he eventually did, but he mostly performed. He danced his heart out, and he worked his way up into the greatest Broadway social circles. Socializing wasn't something he prioritized. He didn't have the time or desire. But he knew it would be good for his hopeful career. Gene spent 3 years working on Broadway, performing on Broadway, in traveling shows, and doing summer stock performances. And while there, he met a beautiful dancer named Betsy Blair. She was only 16, but it was 1940, so no big deal. He had a longtime girlfriend back in Pittsburgh, but he ended that long-term relationship as soon as he met Betsy. And then, later in 1940, he was approached after a stage performance by Arthur Freed, musical producer for MGM, Hollywood's Dream Factory. Gene was happy on Broadway, though. But Arthur Freed wanted that talent in Hollywood. This was the golden age of MGM's grand musicals. They had just released The Wizard of Oz the year prior. Still, not interested. But when that star of The Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland, visited New York and visited Gene, he finally started seeing Hollywood in a different light. Because he respected Judy Garland, and Judy Garland wanted him to go to Hollywood. She wanted to make a movie with him. Louis B. Mayer himself told Gene Kelly that there was a contract waiting for him at MGM whenever he was ready. No screen test required. Hard to say no to that. But when a request for a screen test arrived for him in New York, Gene blew his lid. He was furious with Louis B. Mayer for lying to him. So he went with another offer. An offer from David O. Selznick, who was still hot off the release of Gone with the Wind, which was also just released the year before. Gene Kelly was headed for Hollywood, but he didn't want to leave the woman he loved, Betsy, behind. So he asked her to marry him and start a new life together in Hollywood. They got married on September 24th, 1941. Gene was 29, and Betsy was 17. The newlyweds honeymooned their way across the United States and were welcomed to Hollywood in style by David O. Selznick. He arranged for them to stay at the Roosevelt Hotel on Hollywood Boulevard. And there they were met by Selznick, who was holding a basket of fresh oranges for Gene and a large bouquet of flowers for Betsy. They were instantly thrust into the Hollywood studio life, encouraged to live like a star. But they were happy living life just as they had in New York. Simple. They kept dressing casually, living simply, and donating the now excess of money to charities. They didn't need much. At Hollywood social events, when the men would retire for cigars and whiskey while the women retreated elsewhere to gossip, Betsy chose to stay with Gene, the whiskey, and the cigars. They were confident with their way of living life, and they were not willing to conform to what Hollywood expected of them. They were really happy. And within a couple of months into their new lives in Hollywood, they discovered they were expecting a baby. Not long into their lives in Hollywood, it became apparent that Selznick International was in the midst of a rapid fall from fame. Trouble with the IRS forced Selznick to liquidate the studio, and he had to do something that almost broke him: sell the rights of Gone with the Wind to MGM. And Gene Kelly was heading that direction too. Judy Garland got her wish when she was first able to star in a movie with the talented Gene Kelly in MGM's musical For Me and My Gal in 1942. Gene Kelly taught Judy Garland a lot in terms of dance, and he said she was the quickest study he'd ever known, and he taught a lot of people. Gene was still holding a grudge against Louis B. Mayer, but 1942 MGM was the very best place a film star could be. If Gene and Betsy thought David O. Selznick laid on the star treatment, they were ready to be wowed by the MGM treatment. The first order of business was a large, beautiful home in Beverly Hills, complete with a housekeeper. They were treated to luxuries like regular deliveries of Gene's favorite chocolates from a candy store back home. Anything they wanted, they could have now. They still kept things pretty simple, though. The Kellys were so anti-conformity in Hollywood that being welcomed into their small, exclusive social circle became something desired by many. Gene didn't put aside much time for socializing, so when he did, he wanted to ensure that he was giving his energy and time to individuals who could enrich him somehow. He wanted to surround himself with talented, intellectual, informed, artistic types. He wanted the moments to matter. Some of Gene and Betsy's new friends who they regularly welcomed into their home were Lena Horne, Jessica Tandy, Phil Silvers, and Judy Garland. A typical evening spent at the Kelly home in Beverly Hills would consist of arriving at 5:30 for a few games of ping pong, then a potluck dinner. Man, I'm just dying to know what Judy Garland brought for her potluck dish. And then, if they were really lucky, someone would play the piano while they were delighted by the singing of Judy Garland. Gene would only dance if someone asked him to, and that was not always guaranteed. After dinner settled, the group would usually play Gene's trademark game called The Game, which was a variation of charades, very physical and very fun. Gene was insanely competitive, and his team always won. Gene and his guests would talk and drink wine and have a wonderful time until 2 o'clock in the morning or later sometimes. If it got too late or too early in the morning, Gene and his pals would delight in a snack of milk and cookies to round off a great night. These casual parties usually only took place on Saturday nights. Weekdays were early bedtime because he took his work at the studio very seriously. Gene Kelly was an instant sensation after his first musical with MGM, For Me and My Gal, helped tremendously by the fact that he starred so well alongside superstar Judy Garland. Their chemistry was magic, both on screen and off, in a platonic way, of course. One person Gene Kelly did not have chemistry with, though, was his co-star in his next movie, Lucille Ball. Can't click with them all. So, as we do here on Stars of the Golden Age, we're going to leave Gene Kelly's professional life mostly in the backdrop now that he's all cozied in at the MGM Dream Factory. And we're going to journey through his personal life, starting with him becoming a father. Gene and Betsy welcomed their daughter, Carrie, on October 16, 1942. Gene and Betsy had always been a dynamic duo, and now that they had Carrie, they were a dynamic team. They took their roles as Carrie's parents very seriously. As for Gene Kelly as a father, his daughter Carrie had nothing but wonderful things to say about him. In fact, she said she spent more time with him than with her mother. They had a really close relationship. He made sure to spend quality time with her every single day, no matter how busy he was, and he always helped her with her homework and supported her intellectually. Carrie treasured her moments with her dad, and there were plenty of them. She said she was always included in the eclectic soirees at their home, and she was always treated more as an adult than a child. She felt respected. She was encouraged to be a part of all the intellectual adult conversations that occurred among Hollywood's greats within the walls of their home. They took a lot of enriching local family field trips, and they always had a wide variety of pets. And Carrie had chores, just like any other typical American child. The best thing about Gene as a father was that Carrie knew he wanted to spend time with her and share experiences together. He wasn't doing any of it out of responsibility. He wanted to be in her company. And that is one of the greatest gifts a parent can give a child. Gene Kelly wanted desperately to join the war effort and enlist during World War II, but Louis B. Mayer refused to let his prize go. Finally, it came to the point that Gene didn't care what Louis B. Mayer thought. He enlisted in the Navy in 1944. He actually appealed directly to President Franklin D. Roosevelt to ensure his enlistment. As the military did with movie stars often during the war, not always, Gene was given a pretty easy assignment. He was stationed in Washington, D.C. in the photographic section, and he was really disappointed by this order. He wanted to be in the front lines, but he quickly realized that what he was doing making Navy films was itself a good contribution to the war effort. He was honorably discharged in 1946. Betsy had moved out east during Gene's time in the Navy as well, and she got a job to do her part for the war effort. When they moved back to LA, they got a new house. The house they would make a home. Here is how the home was described in my primary source. The book, He's Got Rhythm, The Life and Career of Gene Kelly by Cynthia Brideson and Sara Brideson. Quote, built 20 years earlier, it was considered old for Beverly Hills. With its white exterior, accented by red shutters, it resembled a quaint Connecticut farmhouse. Avocado trees grew plentiful in the backyard. The house was as free of Hollywood pretensions inside as it was out. The living room walls were lined rimming with books that Gene and Betsy spent their leisure time reading. End quote. The house was large enough to have separate small quarters for both their housekeeper and her husband, as well as Gene's secretary. Gene wanted a swimming pool, but Betsy said no. Too Hollywood. So they compromised and put in a volleyball court instead, which got a lot of use. For the interior of their home, the Kellys chose to decorate themselves instead of hiring a decorator like most every other movie star did. They wanted to make it really theirs. So they picked up items that fit their style at yard sales and antique shops. Imagine a huge Hollywood star like Gene Kelly popping into your rummage sale. Betsy had always had in the back of her mind that she would step back into show business once Carrie began school. Remember, that's how she and Gene met in a Broadway production. True to her dreams, Betsy did just that when Carrie started school. This time in movies. Her film debut was alongside Rosalind Russell and Mervyn Douglas in 1946's The Guilt of Janet Ames at Columbia. While Betsy was enthusiastically embracing her new purpose in life on the silver screen, Gene was welcoming to town a young woman named Jeannie Coyne, who had been one of his dance students back in Pennsylvania when she was a child. Well, Jeannie was all grown up now at 23 years old, and she was climbing the ranks in the dance world just as Gene had, starting in Broadway and now in Hollywood. Gene was very impressed with her talent and drive, and he wanted to help her. So he and Betsy invited her to stay at their home while she got settled in her new life in Hollywood. This wasn't uncommon for the Kellys. They invited anyone who needed a place to stay into their home. Jeannie became part of their family. Okay, we're going to glide back into Gene Kelly's professional life a bit. By the early 1950s, Gene Kelly had added outstanding flair to movies like Anchors Away, CoverGirl, The Pirate, Summer Stock, Ziegfeld Follies, and Singin' in the Rain. He had danced and acted with the likes of Judy Garland, Rita Hayworth, Frank Sinatra, Sid Charisse, Lena Horne, Donald O'Connor, Debbie Reynolds, Rita Moreno, and Jerry the Mouse. Yes, the Jerry of Tom and Jerry fame. You can find that in Anchors Away. Gene was able to dance with the Nicholas brothers in The Pirate. Remember, Gene and his brother Fred replaced them in Cab Calloway's band for a short time. This number in The Pirate was the first time a black man and a white man danced together on screen. It was 1948. Little Shirley Temple and Bill Bojangles Robinson had been the very first interracial dance duo on screen. Louis B. Mayer was very against Gene dancing with the Nicholas brothers, but Gene didn't care. The scene was cut from the movie in much of the South. Gene was the hottest dancer in all of Hollywood. Sorry, Fred Astaire. But what Fred Astaire was to the 1930s, Gene Kelly was to the 1940s and 1950s. Plus, they were two completely different kinds of dancers, so it's hard to really even compare them. They're both great. The two did collaborate together a few times, but they were just cut from different cloth. They remained friendly, but their artistic and creative differences were too great. They actually became pretty good friends later in life. Gene danced, acted, choreographed, and directed throughout his Hollywood career. A couple of notable on-screen dance routines I want to talk about are the mop dance in Thousands Cheer and the newspaper dance in Summer Stock. Gene Kelly became known for his use of props within his dance numbers, and this began on screen with the mop dance. It was the first dance solo that he choreographed for a feature film. That spinny thing he does at the end is just wild. And then when I first saw the newspaper dance in Summer Stock, I was mesmerized. It is so cool. It was so creative and clearly took so much precision choreography to pull off. Please go check them both out. I'll post videos of each on Facebook and Instagram. The newspaper number in Summer Stock remained his all-time favorite solo dance routine, and one of the most difficult. Although Gene Kelly made it look seamless and easy, it was definitely not easy to pull off. On average, Gene worked long days for 6 to 8 weeks rehearsing and perfecting his numbers before filming. He didn't step in front of a camera until every single step and every single move was absolutely perfect. Gene had an unfortunate skiing accident in Switzerland in 1958, and at that point, his life of dancing was forever changed. It forced him to slow down on those more physically demanding dance moves. While I was chatting with Joy, who is the one who requested Gene Kelly, I, in turn, expressed to her my nervousness about taking the journey through his story because I've heard things throughout the years that he was a bit difficult, that he was known for having a temper, and I just wanted to live in my fantasy land because I love him. Well, after taking the in-depth trip through his life and knowing what I know now, my own personal view on it is that Gene Kelly was not necessarily temperamental. Well, maybe he could be at times. But what I think it boiled down to was that he was extremely determined. He worked extremely hard to be the best dancer he could be, to build on his skills and expand his abilities as wide as they could possibly go. He worked his whole life to get to where he was. He was an incredibly hard worker, he was a perfectionist, and he was very protective of his own personal value. He knew his worth, and he wanted it respected. He was a professional, and he expected professionalism in return. Sometimes that perfectionism spilled over into kind of controlling behavior. So I think that expectation that he had for those he worked alongside to present themselves with hard-working professionalism sometimes ended with frustration on his part when he was disappointed in not receiving it exactly as he expected. Yes, his behavior was likely extreme many times, and I'm not excusing his temper. But knowing what I know about him now, I know that doesn't make him a bad person. He was just wildly devoted to his art, and he had high expectations for those working alongside him. But overall, he sounds like he was a really nice guy. Back to Gene's personal life. Unfortunately, Jean and Betsy's story wasn't the happily ever after kind. Betsy had been so young when she married Jean, and as she grew deeper into adulthood, she realized maybe she wanted to explore more of life, have a little independence. She'd always remained so dependent on Jean. Jean supported his wife's need for independence and her need to explore more of her own interests. Meanwhile, his former dance student, Jeannie, who had been living with them, had married and divorced a friend of Jean's actually. And upon her divorce, Jean invited her to be his dancing and choreography assistant. You can actually see them dancing together in the kitchen dancing scene in 1950's Summer Stock. They appeared in mini numbers, but the kitchen number showed them dancing most closely together, if I remember right. Jean and Jeannie worked well together, and they had a similar drive to succeed in their professional success. Jean became closer to Jeannie, but he was devoted to his wife and faithful to his marriage. But that marriage continued to grow further and further apart. And then Betsy had an affair, and another. They had drifted too far apart. Jean was having an affair with work, and Betsy with other men. In 1955, Betsy told Jean that she had fallen in love with another man, and she wanted a divorce. Jean calmly replied to this by saying, "I've known about your affairs. I thought that since you never had a true adolescence, they'd pass. I'll wait it out." He didn't want the marriage to end, but Betsy did. They separated and ultimately divorced in April of 1957. Jean was devastated by the divorce, and I assume Betsy was as well. She later wrote of the end of their marriage, quote, "I finally understood that nothing ever goes away. You can't leave it behind or erase it. Everything you live is forever a part of you." End quote. Their daughter, Carrie, a teenager when they separated, was the most devastated because she truly thought her parents were really happy. Jean wasn't accustomed to failure, as he tried with everything in him to prevent it, so that added to his emotional scarring after the divorce. But the silver lining was that he was now free to explore a deeper relationship with Jeannie Coyne, and he could step over into a romantic relationship with her, which he did a few months after his marriage with Betsy had ended. 48-year-old Gene Kelly and 37-year-old Jeannie Coyne got married on August 8, 1960. Carrie had always loved Jeannie. She'd known her closely for years, and she was very happy for her father's fresh start with love. Jeannie stepped away from dancing and show business when she and Gene got married. Carrie was, by this point, 18 years old and spent most of her time in Europe with Betsy. Gene also went into semi-retirement, but he was a difficult man to hold down for too long. That changed a bit when Jeannie informed him that she was pregnant. Their little boy, Timothy, was born in March of 1962, and 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Bridget. Gene was so happy. At this point, he really slowed down from work and devoted most of his time and energy to his family. They were his top priority. In March of 1972, still living very happily and having a wonderful time raising their now 10-year-old and 8-year-old children, everything was about to change. Jeannie noticed several large bruises all over her body with no logical explanation for them being there. She had leukemia, and she didn't have much time left. Jeannie stayed strong and positive throughout her illness. When the end was nearing, she did everything she could to prepare Gene for life without her. She was training him for life as a grieving single father. Jeannie passed away on May 10, 1973, just 14 months after she learned she was ill. She was only 50 years old. This was the worst time of Gene's life, but he had to keep strong for his children. He was going to make sure that they were raised well and that they were happy and that they felt loved. He never had to work again if he didn't want to, so he had plenty of time to focus on his children. Eventually, Gene returned to do a few projects in television and live theater, and then MGM's That's Entertainment and That's Entertainment Too. But most of his focus was put into raising his children. More devastation came to Gene and his children a decade after they lost Gene. It was Christmas time, 1983, and a faulty light on their Christmas tree started a fire. The house was completely destroyed by the fire. They lost everything. Much of it could be replaced, of course, and everyone was safe. But Gene had so many sentimental possessions in the home, and also a completed first draft of his autobiography. In the aftermath, Gene had an exact replica of the home rebuilt in its spot, even though the kids were grown and about to leave home. Because that was his home. When the kids grew and moved into their adult lives, Gene was alone for the first time in his life. And he was aging, which, for someone who'd curated their entire life on physical movement and expression, it wasn't easy for him. But he was tough and he adapted. In 1985, 73-year-old Gene Kelly met 26-year-old Patricia Ward, an author and researcher, who was working as a screenwriter on a documentary for the Smithsonian. Gregory Peck was supposed to be narrating the project, but he became unavailable. So Gene Kelly was sent to her. She was so young that she had never heard of Gene Kelly, so when he was supposed to meet with her, she didn't know if she'd be expecting a man or a woman. Well, it was Gene Kelly, and the two connected instantly on an intellectual level. After their time working together, Patricia went to learning more about this legend named Gene Kelly. She read a biography of his life and watched several of his movies. 6 months later, Gene called her and asked if she would help him rewrite his autobiography that he lost in the fire. They worked very closely together for 5 years on his story. And while doing so, they fell in love. 77-year-old Gene Kelly married 31-year-old Patricia Ward in 1990. Gene Kelly suffered a serious stroke in July of 1994, which had him in the hospital for almost 2 months. The following year, he had a second stroke, which left him paralyzed on one side. Betsy later claimed that Patricia isolated him from his family and friends, that she had the locks changed, did not return phone calls, fired their housekeeper, and got him a new doctor. She said that Patricia required Gene's children to make an appointment to see him, and often didn't honor that. Betsy did get to see him, and she was happy for that. On February 2nd, 1996, Gene Kelly died after suffering from another massive stroke. He was 83 years old. And now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Gene Kelly was originally supposed to star with Judy Garland in Easter Parade, but he broke his leg while practicing a complicated dance step. So, of course, Fred Astaire joined Judy for Easter Parade. It was a huge hit, and Fred Astaire joked that he was very happy that Gene Kelly had broken his leg. Bullet point number 2. Gene and Betsy Kelly were very politically involved in fighting back against the House Un-American Acts Committee during the Red Scare and the blacklisting in Hollywood. They held many meetings inside of their home and banded together with other Hollywood figures to create a united front and provide aid to those whose careers were affected by it. Bullet point number 3. During the rain scene in Singin' in the Rain, Gene Kelly was extremely sick. He had a fever of 103 degrees. The scene took 6 days to complete because of his condition. I mean, he got soaked in that scene. In conclusion, Gene Kelly was an industrious and devoted dancer, and he had an energetic drive to be the best he possibly could. He wasn't going to get onto a stage or in front of a movie camera until his routine was absolute perfection, down to every last step. I want to read you an excerpt from the January 1946 issue of Photoplay magazine, so you can hear how he was viewed at the height of his fame. Quote, "There is about him and his artistry the wonderment of childhood, the sad searching loneliness which seeks companionship in the fairyland of the imagination. It is an abiding, cherished faith in make-believe. It is the thing that Chaplin had. It is the steadfast refusal to admit that there is no Santa Claus. On the other hand, there is Kelly and his imagination, which is as big as the world, and is pure childhood, and, as such, is just about the nicest thing on the screen today. It is well for all of us that Kelly has had the persistence to induce producers to give his imagination free rein." End quote. That same article goes on to describe Gene Kelly in 1946 Hollywood like this. Quote, "Off the screen, he neither looks nor behaves like a Hollywood personality. He is good-looking, but not handsome. His clothes are neat without, however, making him a candidate for a list of the best-dressed men." End quote. Gene Kelly described himself as looking like a truck driver, even if he was dressed in a tuxedo. He described himself as an average Joe, but he was well-read and well-informed. He was an incredibly talented athlete. He could speak several languages. He was intelligent. And man, could he dance. It was said that Gene Kelly had strong political beliefs, but always remained open-minded to opposing viewpoints. He enjoyed having spirited discussions with people who saw things differently than he did. He was always willing to learn. He was drawn to intelligent, creative, and talented individuals, and hard-working, especially in those that he was working with. Gene was known to be tough, sometimes difficult, but if you worked hard and gave it your all, like he did and like he expected everyone to, you would be just fine. He was a competitive perfectionist. Did that spill over into arrogant and harsh behavior? Maybe, but deep down, it sounds like he was a good person. Gene Kelly was a highly physical dancer. He was a Renaissance man. He stood up for people. He fought for the underdog. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind if he saw someone being treated unfairly. Gene Kelly once said he wanted to create something timeless through his dance. I think it's safe to say that he was successful in doing that. He had an infectious enthusiasm for life. He was private, and he was careful as to who he let into his inner circle. And that just makes me respect him more. He wasn't willing to give more of himself than he had available to give. That's admirable. After all, he had to save all he could for the dance floor. Thank you, Gene Kelly, for giving us so much remarkable on-screen entertainment that will bring us joy and happiness for years to come. Thank you for showing us to work hard and chase our dreams, and to never settle with a life that doesn't bring us happiness. Life is just too short to live without a little happiness. And thank you all for listening. And now I would like to share a review of the week. This is from Mateo on Apple Podcasts, who wrote alongside a 5-star rating, quote, "Well-researched, informative, entertaining, and one of the best podcasts on classic Hollywood," end quote. Thank you so much, Mateo. Please leave a positive comment where you listen, and maybe I'll read yours too. Having these positive ratings and reviews helps a ton in discoverability for hopeful new listeners. Thanks again, Mateo. I really appreciate it. I'm going to share some clips of Gene Kelly dancing on Facebook and Instagram, so if you haven't already done so, please give Stars of the Golden Age a follow on one or both of these platforms. If you want to hear more in-depth information and behind-the-scenes stories of Gene's many remarkable movies, I highly recommend Cynthia Brideson and Sara Brideson's biography, He's Got Rhythm. It'll have everything you need. One more thing. Come on over to Patreon and get some awesome old Hollywood bonus content. What are you waiting for? This month's bonus episode is all about the history of the Oscars. It is super interesting. You don't want to miss it. We had some juicy vintage celebrity gossip and a nice hot winter cocktail on the cocktail party episode. And our movie of the month this month is The Thin Man. Lots of great stuff and a pretty sweet value. And you'll be helping little old me out a lot with your support. Please consider it. Thanks, guys. Reach for the positive in every day, be kind to everyone you encounter, and have a great rest of your week. My primary source for this episode was a book titled He's Got Rhythm: The Life and Career of Gene Kelly by Cynthia Brideson and Sara Brideson. I also used an article from PBS titled The Star Perfromers, Gene Kelly, the January 1946 issue of Photoplay magazine, and IMDB.